New Year's Eve had always been a time for celebration, for reflecting on the past and embracing the future. For 15 years, we had spent it together, raising glasses to another year of love, stability, and shared dreams. This year, however, something felt different. I didn't know it then, but this would be the night everything changed. She had been distant in the weeks leading up to it, small things, barely noticeable at first. A quick glance at her phone, a hesitation when I asked about her day, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I had brushed it off, convincing myself that it was just the stress of the holidays, the exhaustion of work, the inevitable ebb and flow of a long-term marriage. That night, she was more radiant than ever, dressed in a way that made my breath catch. But it wasn't for me. I realized that when she barely met my eyes, when her lips curved into a practiced smile that felt rehearsed. She was heading to a work party, something she had mentioned offhandedly days before, as if it were an insignificant detail. I had never been one to question her social outings. Trust had been the foundation of our marriage. But when she leaned in to kiss my cheek before leaving, something in my stomach twisted. It was too casual, too routine, as if I had already ceased to exist in the space she occupied. I spent the evening alone, watching the clock tick closer to midnight. The house was too quiet, the echoes of past celebrations lingering in the empty spaces. I tried to distract myself, flipping through channels, answering a few texts from friends who assumed we were celebrating together. But my mind kept returning to her. To the way she had smiled as she left, the excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. She didn't come home until well past 2. I had drifted off in the living room, half awake when I heard the door creak open. For a moment I stayed still, listening. Her steps were unsteady, the faint rustling of fabric, the quiet clink of her purse being set down on the counter. Then the scent hit me. It wasn't just alcohol. There was something else, something unmistakable. I sat up slowly, and when she turned to look at me, I saw it immediately. A faint smudge of lipstick on her collarbone, a mark too deliberate, too intimate to be ignored. She didn't notice at first. She offered a lazy smile, the kind she used when she thought she could talk her way out of anything. "You're still up?" she murmured, her voice thick with alcohol and something else, something heavier. I didn't respond. I just watched her, waiting. And then, as realization dawned, I saw the smile falter. Just for a second. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. The foundation of trust one had built my life upon cracked, splintering under the weight of the truth I had tried so hard to ignore. I stood up, moving slowly, methodically, as if any sudden action might break the fragile thread of my self-control. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath shallow, but my mind was eerily clear. Every detail of the moment seemed heightened, the flickering light from the television, the slow ticking of the clock on the wall, the way she shifted under my gaze, avoiding my eyes as if she could will away the inevitable confrontation. She took a step toward me, hesitating. "It's not what you think," she said, the lie falling from her lips so effortlessly that for a split second, I almost wanted to believe it. Almost. But the evidence was right in front of me, on her skin, in her voice, in the air between us thick with the scent of betrayal. I let the silence stretch, watching as discomfort settled into her features. I wanted her to feel it, to squirm under the weight of her own deception. But more than that, I wanted the truth, even if it destroyed me. The truth had been laid bare, and with it, any illusions I had clung to were shattered. There was no going back, no repairing what had been broken. But instead of confronting her that night, instead of raising my voice and demanding an explanation I already knew would be a lie, I chose something different. I chose patience. Rage would have been easy. I could have let it consume me, let it dictate my actions. But I had spent years being methodical, being the one who thought ahead, who controlled his emotions rather than being ruled by them. And so, I sat in silence, watching as she fumbled for excuses, watching as her confidence wavered under the weight of my quiet understanding. She expected me to yell, to demand answers, to crumble. Instead, I nodded, turned away, and let the moment pass. Confusion flickered in her expression, but she didn't push. Perhaps she thought she had gotten away with it. Perhaps she convinced herself that I was too blind, too naive to see the truth for what it was. She couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, while she showered, I took the first step. My fingers moved quickly over my phone screen as I transferred our savings into an account she had no access to. I made calls to the bank, to my attorney, setting things into motion. Every shared asset, every financial tie that bound us together, I began severing them, one by one. I went through her phone, scrolling through messages I had already known existed but hadn't allowed myself to see before. There they were. The flirtations, the confessions, the careful planning of stolen nights. My name appearing in ways that made my stomach twist, not as a husband, not as someone she respected, but as an obstacle. Something to be worked around. Managed. That was the moment any lingering affection I had for her died. For weeks, I played the part of the oblivious husband. I kissed her before she left for work, listened to her stories over dinner, let her believe that I was still the man she had manipulated so easily. But each moment she spent in our home, laughing, pretending, living in the comfort I had provided her, brought me closer to the day I would take it all away. I planned every detail meticulously. She wouldn't just lose me, she would lose everything she had taken for granted. The house? In my name. The accounts? Already moved. Her credit cards? Set to be cancelled. The security of the life she had built with me? Gone, in the blink of an eye. And when the moment came, when I was ready to walk away and leave her with nothing but regret, I would make sure she knew exactly why. But I wasn't done yet. There was more. I wanted her to feel the depth of her betrayal in the same way I had. I reached out to a private investigator, gathering every possible piece of evidence. Screenshots, hotel bookings, phone records, it all painted a damning picture of just how long she had been living this lie. With each new discovery, my resolve hardened. She had built her world on deceit, and now she would watch it crumble. I collected everything into a folder, not just for myself, but for those she had fooled. Her friends, her colleagues, even her family. I wanted them to see her for who she really was. I wouldn't need to say a word. The truth would speak for itself. The days passed slowly, each one bringing me closer to the moment she would realize that her empire of lies was collapsing. I watched her, studied her every move, every fake smile, every moment she thought she was in control. The satisfaction of knowing what was coming was the only thing that kept me sane. Then, finally, the day arrived. I had my exit plan perfected. I had drained our accounts, left her without a financial safety net, ensured that the house she loved would soon belong solely to me. I had packed my bags, ready to disappear from her life before she even knew what hit her. But before I left, I had one last move to make. A final reminder that actions have consequences. I scheduled an email to be sent to her boss, her closest friends, her family. Attached were the files, the undeniable proof of her betrayal. And as I walked out the door, I knew that by the time she woke up, everything she thought she had secured would be gone. I wasn't just leaving her. I was erasing her from the life she had taken for granted. And when she finally realized it, she would have no one to blame but herself. The morning of my departure felt like the calm before a storm. The house was still, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. My bags were packed, my plan in motion. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that by the time the sun had fully risen, her carefully crafted life would be nothing more than a pile of ashes. She came downstairs, still groggy from sleep, stretching as she walked into the kitchen. I sat at the dining table, waiting. The folder sat beside me, thick, damning, final. It was time. She greeted me casually, as if this was any other morning. As if everything was the same. But it wasn't. It never would be again. I slid the folder across the table toward her without a word. Her brow furrowed as she opened it, eyes scanning the pages of betrayal I had collected. I watched as the blood drained from her face. The confidence, the arrogance, all of it stripped away in an instant. She flipped through the documents, messages, and photographs, her breathing quickening with each page. She looked up at me, her lips parting, searching for something to say. An excuse. A plea. A lie. But I wasn't interested in hearing it. "You've been caught," I said, my voice calm, devoid of emotion. "And now, you're going to face the consequences." She tried to fight it at first. Accusations flew, claims that I had misunderstood, that it wasn't what it looked like, that I was overreacting. But there was nothing left for her to spin, no version of events she could twist into something innocent. The proof sat in front of her, undeniable, irreversible. And then, when she realized there was no escape, she switched tactics. She softened, her voice trembling as she reached for me. Apologies spilled from her lips, desperate and hollow. She begged, promising that it had meant nothing, that she still loved me, that we could fix it. I let her words hang in the air, meaningless and weightless. I had already decided my course of action. This was not a negotiation. I stood, stepping back as she remained seated, gripping the table as if it could somehow ground her in the chaos unraveling around her. "Everything is done. The accounts are closed. The house is mine. You have nothing left here," she gasped, her hands trembling. "No, you can't do this." I leaned in slightly, just enough to make sure she saw the certainty in my eyes. "I already did." Then, without another word, I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her alone in the ruins of what she had destroyed. As I stepped outside, the morning air felt sharper, clearer, like the first breath after being trapped underwater. The weight that had pressed down on me for weeks lifted, replaced by a strange, quiet relief. I paused for a moment, listening to the stillness, half expecting her to come running after me, to scream, to demand that I come back. But she didn't. She knew it was over. I walked to my car, my grip firm on the handle as I pulled the door open. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The house we had shared, the life we had built, it belonged to the past now. And as I drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of her betrayal, I realized something. For the first time in years, I was truly free. The road stretched endlessly before me, the city shrinking in my rearview mirror. I had severed every tie, erased every trace of the life I had once built, leaving behind only the ruins of her deception. And yet, as I drove farther away, I didn't feel broken. I felt something else entirely. Liberation. I settled in a new town, far enough from my past that even its echoes couldn't reach me. I found a modest apartment, started over with nothing but the knowledge that I had taken back control. The emptiness of my new space felt different, lighter, freer. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was suffocating under the weight of someone else's lies. But despite the fresh start, the past lingered. I wondered how she was handling it, if she had finally grasped the depth of what she had lost. I didn't check, didn't ask. I didn't need to. I knew the storm I had left her in would be enough. And I had no interest in witnessing her struggle. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The scars of betrayal faded, replaced by something I had forgotten how to embrace: peace. I built a new routine, one that was mine alone. I woke up without resentment, without doubt. I spent evenings in silence, but it was a silence I chose, not one imposed upon me by a failing marriage. Then, unexpectedly, life gave me something I wasn't looking for. Her name was Claire. We met at a bookstore, reaching for the same title at the same time. It was a moment so simple, so ordinary, that I almost didn't register its significance. But as our eyes met, something shifted. A spark, not of longing, not of desperation, but of genuine connection. We spoke about books, about travel, about things that had nothing to do with the past. She didn't know my story, and I didn't ask for hers. And that was the beauty of it. She met me as I was now, not as the man I had once been. I didn't dive in recklessly. I took my time. I had learned patience, learned to trust myself before I trusted anyone else. And yet, with each passing day, Claire became a presence I looked forward to. A reminder that life moved forward, no matter how shattered the past might have been. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, she turned to me with a quiet curiosity. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot," she said. I smiled, feeling, for the first time, like my past no longer defined me. "I have," I admitted. "But I think I finally know where I'm going." And with that, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't set me free. Walking away had. And in doing so, I had found something far more valuable than vengeance. I had found myself again. As the months passed, my connection with Claire deepened. We took our time, allowing the foundation to build naturally. It felt different, like something real, not a temporary distraction or a means to forget. For the first time in my life, I felt understood in a way I hadn't before. She listened, not just to my words but to the spaces between them, the emotions I hadn't fully put into words. I told her, eventually, about my past. Not in detail, but enough for her to understand why I had needed to start over. She didn't pry, didn't judge. She simply took my hand and held it, as if grounding me in the present, reminding me that I was no longer that man lost in betrayal. One evening, as we sat on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized I was truly happy. Not the fleeting kind of happiness that comes from revenge or winning against someone who wronged you, but the kind that comes from healing, from moving forward with no regrets. I had left behind everything I once thought defined me. And yet I had found more than I had ever lost.